Hello, everyone, and welcome to the MC Events Podcast, name pending. I am your host, or one of your hosts, Joey Capollo, and I'm joined by Gilan, and we're here today to start conversation about how it is to make Minecraft events, why it's so difficult, why everybody seems to want to do it, and why everybody seems to struggle at doing it. For me, you might know me as the owner of Block Wars, as well as the owner of MCC Highlights, the YouTube channel. So I know a little bit about the analysis side and creating highlights about events, but I also can tell you about putting on one, as Block Wars is a major endeavor requiring a large team of people. And then my co-host Gilan.
Hello, I'm Gilan. I am a Java developer. I make Bucket and Spigot and other type of plugins, so I do a lot of the technical side of events, and I'm currently working on some events with Joey, with Capollo Media. And I hope to bring my practical and technical side to this podcast and share, what it's like in the trenches making these events.
As we all know, Minecraft is a game that requires developers to make all these cool things happen. And while I don't have those technical skills, Gilan very much does. And so he'll be able to speak to that expertise, while I'll be able to bring us more of like the overall of, time management, the timeline for an event, and just what it is you want out of it. So for the goal of our podcast, it is just that. It's appreciate all of the work of the current events going on, point out some of the difficulties in making events that you can see characterized by the current events, and then help offer a plan to any of you out there who want to create your own, no matter the size or scope of it, to say this could be a path for you to follow if you want to make your own. But obviously the current events in the scene, they're all dominated by one name, and that is MCC. Gilan, why is MCC just the top dog right now?
MCC is just, they have an entire team. They're full-time. They have money. And also they have a lot of experience. They care. So Nox Crew, who works on MCC, has been making Minecraft maps in Bedrock Edition, but also stuff in Java Edition for a very long time. They have a lot of talented artists. They have talented programmers, and they have like great vision and game design that just allows them to make a good event. But compared to a lot of other events in the space, they're full time. They get paid. They can spend a lot of time working through these things, and they don't have to rush. So
they have everything going for them and a lot of resources that puts them already separate from,
Exactly.
comparing other events. Like for us at Block Wars, the team is still mainly volunteer. And so we in a lot of ways get compared to MCC because we're both, 8-game mini game events with a final finale game. But one is done by a team that's been working in Minecraft for almost a decade now and doing it professionally for, 7-8 years. Whereas like Block Wars is doing it from the ground up. And so there's these comparisons, but it's almost not fair to say because MCC has so much backing behind it. I mean, if anyone gets a chance, they should go check out the Nox Crew game show that they started back in 2015. That is really like the first step on their path to making MCC. You can see a lot of the game modes get started there with the initial ideas and then later be incorporated into MCC in a different format. And so it's a case that they have this long history, there's a lot of experiences and expertise that make them best suited to make the event that we all look forward to every month, except when they're on a break. But that's not to say that they're only professionals making events, Gilan. I mean, there's .wave/EVNT. Now with that merger, EVNT seems to have a wide pool of talent in terms of development and game design to put on events. And they've been putting on a lot of events recently.
Yeah. One of just today, they put on a charity event called a Life Pack. And they were able to raise like $13,000. It had a bunch of famous YouTubers. I think Small Ant was in there, False Symmetry, Captain Sparkles, a lot of other hermits and stuff. All of those people were in there, and there were a lot of viewers. They were able to raise a lot of money. And it was a good event. It was a simple event. It was just like everyone compete to get to the Ender Dragon first and kill it. But it was really fun. It seems like the viewers were having a fun time and the streamers were having a fun time.
Yeah. It seemed like one that was simple, but it did what it advertised and it did it well. I mean, EVNT also put on recently the X Games event, which was on ESPN even and talked about, which is crazy that a Minecraft event gets that far. But that it was a 2-day event that, was as advertised. There was a Spleef minigame, there was a build battle minigame, and then a capture the flag PvP kind of minigame. And before that, they had put on block hunt, or a form of block hunt, or prop hunt, but in Minecraft. And it just shows that they're very versatile on the events they put on and have a big team that's able to put on very different things. As well, Gilan, there was their Twitch rivals, Minecraft, and then MCL, which were both put on them, which are very different spins on the kind of event formula.
Yeah, I really enjoyed watching Minecraft. It was a lot of events in the space currently. It's just like there's a team of people, or like Nox Crew, or I guess for MCC it's like Scott's Major, makes the teams. Those are the teams. They're all just kind of like content oriented, where it's like, oh, I think these people are going to have a fun time together. But Minecraft made it very interesting because it kind of shook things up. There were a lot of content creators who were with people that it didn't like. You don't see them together a lot. And also the games were tons of fun. It was like they were more like esports oriented games. They were like very point based, and not like something like MCC where you're like jumping around between like more like experiences rather than like competitive games.
Yeah, they had that draft element that made it so teams were picked like on the day drafted. You didn't know your team's going in. You would just get drafted by whichever team captain picked you. And then you would be playing these games. And for at least Minecraft 1 and 2, one was a capture the flag, one was a somewhat styled Bed Wars game kind of redone. But they were essentially one game mode that then changed based on the map, and the gameplay then changed based on the map, and the players got to explore that and have a meta evolve over time over the course of a day or course of 2 days. And it just found its niche as a very different style event than compared to MCC or compared to like the mini game style of event. And then MCL, which was the Minecraft Competitive League, was kind of an approach to bring a MOBA, which if you know MOBAs, it's like League of Legends, Dota, Heroes of the Storm, and bring that into Minecraft in this competitive format. And again, it was very much take the same game mode for weeks on end and have the same teams now compete and have them get better, have them improve, have them change their strategies. And it seemed to really develop a different style of community and gameplay around it as they were searching to, be the best and weren't just focused on making content.
Yeah, I mean, it's very interesting when a lot of Minecraft events currently in the space, it's just like you have these, even if it's like MCC 1, 2, 3, they're kind of one-offs. Like each one is kind of its own thing. And it makes sense because, most events are content creator focused. You just want to mix people up, mix people around so they can try the games out with new people. That's how you create like new content. But MCL did it felt more like a sports league. I mean, it has league in it. And that like that change, that's a change. That's a good thing. You want to change what Minecraft events are like.
For sure. And then we say they're a league, but then we come back to probably a very similar event to MCC because we got to talk about Block Wars as it's partially my pride and joy as well. And it constantly gets compared to MCC because of the format. Even when Tubbo played in Block Wars 3 not long ago, he didn't put the title of the event in his stream. So all of the chat was like, is this MCC back? Is this MCC back? And for them, it was sadly not. But I hope they enjoyed watching Block Wars regardless. And it's just interesting to put on an event that is similar in format, but different in terms of functionally everything else in some ways. Like the philosophies are different about how to make games and how the event is structured and set up. And we kind of have gone in two different directions, where MCC is this very like stylized, polished, produced, meant to be like a spectacle, but not necessarily competitive, but also but is competitive. And Block Wars is trying to develop this separate identity of a less competitive, even though it's currently competitive event, of just being more about bringing together different people in the space as well and having these, fun, more content creator focused event that is not, as you said, the esports style. But what are your thoughts on Block Wars, Gilan?
I mean, as a viewer, because I've jumped around for each of the last 3 Block Wars events. I've jumped around who I've been watching. And it's compared to watching MCCs, it's a very different experience because it's like this change in games, this change in art style. But also I feel like, it's treated differently. It's not just like, oh, it's another MCC. Like a lot of content creators treat it differently because of these different game design. and it's really the games as the core of it, because like the difference between MCC and Block Wars, like yeah, they're both micro events with similar number of games, similar point ideas, but the games are very different. And I think that's what content creators like, because they're like, oh, this is like the quality of MCC, but like a bunch of new games. It's like double MCC, whole new experience.
For sure, that's definitely a thing I've noticed when players talk about the event is just the different styles of games. And you think they'd be similar. Like there's PvP, there's movement, there's team-based games, but like when you actually get down to it, the nitty-gritty of the games will just feel different.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a case of that. I think Block Wars is doing a better job at the moment of trying to innovate and keep pushing forward with what the game modes are, whereas MCC has a very, I don't want to say rigid in the way, a negative way, but a very streamlined focus of like what kind of game experiences they're going for.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I will say, like, if we compare two games between them that get compared a lot, which is Block Wars Extraction and MCC,
Mm-hmm.
Battle Box. Like the maps of both games kind of look the same. It's like you got your players, they charge at each other. It's classic PvP game. But the big difference of like, oh, in Battle Box you have to mine the wool and place your team's wool color in there, versus Extraction where you have to like ride up into the helicopter. Like that
Mm-hmm.
changes the entire PvP dynamic. And it changes the map design. Like the map changes because of that. And it's funny because it's like, yeah, they're both PvP games where you have, it's a round robin, you play each other team once, but it's very different than Battle Box. It's lots of different strategies, and I've seen players who think they know what they're getting into not know what they're getting into.
For sure, with like Extraction and Battle Box, we've seen Battle Box now in, oh boy, 28 canon events and another like 5 or 6 non-canon
And
events.
MCCI.
And we've seen Extraction and MCCI, it's also there, of course. Whereas Extraction we've seen in 16 Origins and 3 now Creator Block Wars. I would say it's a case of Battle Box has kind of kept its same identity. Nox Crews went, we've made the bread and butter of a team v team PvP game, and they've been innovating slowly with some of the things, but it's mainly just like throw a new map, throw a new kit ideas, but keep the rest of the style the same. Whereas from my talks in with Block Wars and the things that they've changed throughout the last 3 events, there's still the idea of trying to find its full identity and trying out different things, whether that's the team all spawning on the same little square, moving the team spawns out, having there be more pickups, having the map be smaller. Like they're still trying things out to see what's the best version of playing, which I think is fun to see because you're seeing this kind of innovation in real time. Whereas MCC has kind of said, this is our game and Battlebox is our game. We're going to keep it just like this and keep doing this.
Yeah, and it's funny because I've played a lot of versions of Extraction as a tester, and it's funny to see like the evolution over time. I remember like one of the maps that I remember playing is the one where it's like you're on this like tropical island type thing. It's like the bridges between
Mm-hmm.
them. And it's funny like comparing that to the one that was in the last event. That's like the enclosed area with the like
The
metal,
bank,
yeah, the bank one,
bank vault.
with the lava. It's funny like the difference between those two maps and how much like just watching the map at this event, like I can like tell it's like better designed for the game. Like the way it's built, it
Mm-hmm.
like works really well. Like the lava and like the ring around it is great for like people trying to control the extraction point, because it's like if you're a player you can't just charge it and extract, like they're gonna stop you. Versus
Mm-hmm.
like one of the problems with the other one is that it was way too easy to extract early and like people rushing.
Yeah.
And also it was like a pretty messy map, because I remember was one of the early ones was the tree one where like there was the tree bridges.
Yes.
That one was one where it's like it was kind of blocked to like the point it was really hard to shoot arrows at people because like you were just so blocked,
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of times you got blindsided and trapped. And it's funny how in this newest map like a lot of those problems aren't there. And it kind of
Mm-hmm.
shows how map design can fix a lot of problems.
Map design and game design often go very hand in hand. And we're going to dive into the weeds into like various, individual game modes at later points, especially when we hope to get some guests on,
Mhm.
whether it's somebody from Block Wars or other people we know. But we're not saying this to just build up Block Wars as, hey, it's better in MCC in our eyes or anything like that. No, it's the idea that we're part of this like process to help innovate it, help make it keep going. And it's cool to see that happen in real time and see it evolve and change. Whereas MCC, as outsiders, we only see the changes as they happen in the canon, canon events. And instead, we're seeing like that finished product every time, in a sense.
I was gonna say on that point that like when it comes to MCC, like a great game that came out, I mean, kind of recently is Meltdown.
Mm-hmm.
And what we saw was the finished product of Meltdown, and like we just saw like what a great game. Like it was well designed, everyone loved it, and it was like this is the finished product of Meltdown. But it's like we haven't played the failed versions of Meltdown because there were definitely decisions they did where that game did not work as well. There were times where some of the timing was messed up, the maps were weird, the decaying wasn't correct, and like there were all these problems. Like we haven't experienced that, and it's hard to really understand the journey if you miss a lot of that. You just see this perfect thing that gets produced all of a sudden, and there's just no way to know how they got there.
Yeah. And that's kind of be what, I mean, this first episode is about, is like showing like MCC is one model for like how to do successful events, but it is not a sustainable model for most people wanting to make their own because of the reasons we laid out before and reasons we're going to lay out again. But then we're just going to talk about, what are the overall things that you need to make an event, which are going to be game design, focusing on the player experience, the theming, having the expertise to do it. But kind of starting with MCC, as we said before, their team is full-time. They get paid full-time to work on MC Championship, the event. They're funded by the maps they make on the marketplace, Noxtree makes. Obviously, people know Terra Swoop Force, but also the Millionaire Mansion or the Batman maps, as well with MCC Island also pulling in some money there. They're very experienced. They've been doing it for almost 10 years now, which is a long time. And as Gilan, you're pointing out, they spend a long time testing and developing each game they bring in because they have such high standards of polish to reach, that means that each new thing they add has to reach those standards before it can be introduced. And they do this because they have these really good understanding of what their event theme and style is. So they ensure each new game or each new edition fits into that theme and style. And they have all these high quality assets and branding so that the things they make and create feel like MCC. Like when they played Meltdown for the first time, we didn't say, this doesn't feel like MCC. We instead go, this feels like a natural extension and in some ways like a better evolution of MCC. Since survival games hasn't really been played since Meltdown's been introduced, it seems like Meltdown's kind of taken its place as that kind of PvP game in some ways. So if you view it as that way, then you view it as MCC has evolved past the basic survival games or Hunger Games, instead now has this brand new game that's very hard to replicate.
And one important thing that you went over was the amount of time they spend testing.
Oh, yeah.
And I think we just want to give a heads up that no matter how long this podcast goes, every single episode, we're going to use the word testing, testing, testing. We're going to say it over and over and over again because it's understandable that you might have limited people, you might have limited time, but testing stuff out is the most important part because you can create a kind of, not the perfect event, but as long as it runs smoothly, people will be pretty happy. Like if people are able to play through the game and it runs smoothly, they're happy. But if you're having to pause for 30 minutes to an hour to fix a really problematic thing that doesn't move on, that's not good for the content creators playing, and especially for the content they're trying to create. No one wants to watch a stream of them sitting around in a lobby for an hour.
Even if not for content creators, if you're just a player of an event, imagine you showed up to a soccer game to play 15 minutes and the ball popped and no one has another ball and you can't play and you're waiting around for 30 minutes for it to go on or figure out what you're doing. You're just sitting around bored waiting for something to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And that's definitely amplified then when it's content creators who are looking to make content and they have viewers watching their stream wanting something to happen. So yes, we're going to talk about testing a lot. We're going to talk about how the player experience is like the biggest thing at the end of the day. And the same way that you think about game design for designing a video game, those same things very much apply to making an event. Because at the end of the day, your Minecraft event is a mini video game. And that is then comes with all the things that need done with it. So, I mean, let's start there. Let's start with game design. Like, what makes a fun game, Gilan? What an easy question to answer.
Yeah, such an easy question. It's such an easy question. Um, it's really up to a lot of things. It's funny because we're just going to go back to like you have to test out your game after you make it. But when you're
Yes.
initially having this idea, you just have to think like what is a fun mechanic like for Minecraft? What is a fun mechanic in Minecraft that you can do something with? So if use an example for MCC, if Ace Race didn't have tridents that you use to propel yourself around, it wouldn't be the same thing. So like that's a game design
Mm-hmm.
thing where it's like I really like trident, like being able to fling yourself with a trident and move around from water to water. Like that's a cool thing. I want to make a game around that, and I think that's the main thing that players will enjoy mechanics being used in a situation. So if you find a good mechanic that you feel like will make a good game, try to design around that mechanic. I think that's a great starting
Yeah.
point.
I think that's the starting point is find that one mechanic that you want central. But then I think you also need to have like a couple other ideas that then bolster and add on to it to make it a full game. Because, for example, in Ace Race, not only do they have the tridents, they have the elytra, they have the jump pads, the boost pads. And so now you have all of these 4 mechanics that come together to all do the same thing, which is propel the player faster. So now all of a sudden, this game is about being as fast as you can. You introduce these 4 mechanics to add strategy. Now you have the elements of a good game design.
I've seen events where it's just like, oh, we're gonna have a kit PvP type thing where everyone just gets in an empty box and fights, and
Mm-hmm.
that's just not interesting. That's very boring to a lot of players unless you do add other mechanics to it because that your event doesn't stand out. And most Minecraft content, especially if you're making a content event, like they've played for a long time, they've experienced that before. You try to give them a new experience.
We're going to talk about this in terms of all events, but we're probably going to come back to the idea that these are events for creators or for people that are making content at least about it, or like, more than just playing it for themselves, they're playing it for viewers watching. And I think that's a good point, is that you want to give them something new, something novel. And there was an event, I'm forgetting, I think it was in Bisec Hosting's event a few months ago where they had that 2D platforming in the space that everyone went, this is so cool, this is so new, we've never seen anything like this. And it wasn't necessarily like a complex game, it was just parkour but in 2 dimensions, so platforming really. But people found it so enjoyable because it was so new in the Minecraft setting.
Yeah, I mean, I think I tested that one. And I remember playing it for the first time, and it was such a cool experience because it was like, why haven't we thought of doing something like this before? And it was interesting because like the entire game had to be designed around it. Like there were no like 3 block jumps because you couldn't sprint because you're basically walking sideways in third person, but you're replaced with a 2D sprite that's moving back and forth. And I actually know for a fact that Floof, who is part of Capollo Media, actually I think worked on that game. So I forgot if I asked him anything about it. But he was talking about the fact that like, yeah, he was really loved this game idea when he made it and really wanted to do something with it. And that's a mechanic,
It's the case where like that one mechanic sold the whole game. But if you're going to do something like a more simple mechanic, often you're going to have to combine different ones to get a whole game design. So if you were starting like for your event, Gilan, imagine, or hypothetically, you're like, I want something with parkour. I want people doing 3-4 block jumps, going around obstacles, that kind of thing. And then you have to say, what's the next element? Do I want them to be racing against time? Do I want them to be racing just against each other? Do I want them to be like running away from the lava chasing them, which is different than just racing for time? Or are they trying to complete harder and harder obstacles to get more points? Like there's so many different ways you can then go with what the game objective is that are not necessarily completely contingent on what the mechanic is. Because you could also imagine a PvP game that's all about parkour. It'd probably be miserable for most people who are bad at parkour, but for the ones who are good at parkour, they would have a blast.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about the difficulties with making parkour games before in calls. We've talked about the problem that, if you're not that good at parkour, which a lot of people aren't, parkour can be really annoying. And so one of the big challenges with designing, a parkour game, for example, is, hey, there's going to be people who are playing this who aren't that good at it. How do I make it fun for them? And that applies to other games as well. PvP games. How do I make this PvP game still fun, even if someone isn't winning the whole time? I think that's a very important attribute.
That's a thing you touch on right there. How is this game still fun when people aren't winning? Like, for example, imagine a survival games. Imagine Hunger Games in the most classic format. You die, you're out. There's no gulag, there's no revive system, anything like that. The players who die first do not have a good time. Usually, they try to loot, they get caught while they're looting, they die. They're now in spectator for the whole game. Instead, consider a game like Nox Crew Sands of Time, where even the teams that might finish last were having fun the whole game as they were exploring the dungeon, finding sand, finding coins, until either they got lucked in or someone, forgot to put sand in or something happened, but like they still had fun through the whole experience.
Mm-hmm.
And so you want to ensure that the game experience is fun for the players that do the best and also fun for the players who score the least points, if it is a point system, or score last, however you have that set up, because if they still need to have a good time, so they'll come back the next time.
Yeah, I mean, recently we were running a test for an event, and I remember in the feedback channel, one of the testers said, basically said, we did really badly, but I still had fun, and I'm so happy that happened. I'm so happy that even though you were getting crushed by some of the other teams, that you still had fun in the game. That's the goal. Everyone should have fun. It shouldn't just be the 4 people who are on the winning team or whatever.
And then that's just a little bit about player experience. We're going to dive in more. We're going to probably have whole episodes dedicated to just game design, player experience, some of these other things we're talking about. We're kind of giving a brief overview of kind of why you should listen to us and that we have some things to contribute, we think, to this conversation. And then the next point being the viewer experience, Gilan. This is one that's more focused, as I said, on the content creator events before. But the viewer experience is important if you consider games like was it in a Twitch Rivals? There was one. It was the 3 blind mice.
Oh yeah.
And one of the players would be screen was completely covered by the texture pack, and they weren't able to see anything. And their teammates had to then guide them down tunnels and jumps and slight jumps and everything. But if you're watching that streamer, oh boy, you did not get to see much going on.
Yeah, I mean, it's a difficult, as if you're just a player that's doing that by yourself, you can probably get through it, if you're in a call and other people are telling you. But the fact is that, one streamer can have thousands of people watching them. And at the end of the day, no matter really how small your event is, if there are content creators, there's going to be more people watching than playing. And so it's very important to think about the fact that a majority of people who are experiencing your event aren't actually playing it, they're watching it.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to kind of think about them and cater, how can I make it interesting? It's kind of up to the content creator to, be who they are and be entertaining. That's their personality side. But also, you have to make sure the game is fun to watch. And a lot of events do a good job of that. That's how they succeed.
And I'm not pointing out the 3 blind mice game to say this is a terrible example, because I think as well they did a good job that each player took turns, so they weren't just blind for the whole game. And as well, it kind of added to the excitement in some ways for that streamer, that even their chat was like, we can't help you here, you just gotta go. But I think if you have too much like that, too much where the streamer and then the viewer is left in the dark, that's not going to be a good time then to watch the event. Other good ways to kind of show, for the viewer experience, is to be able to see, points, or see the current standings, or just see kind of what is happening. And MCC does this really well with the scoreboards along the side. Those show different things by game, but it allows the viewers to know, at a moment they tune into the stream, all right, we're on game 4 of 8. They're playing Battle Box. They're on round 7. This is how my team's doing. Because not only is it the viewer experience of who started watching right when the event started, but it's the viewer experience who joined late and is like, what's going on, guys? I'm trying to get caught up.
Yeah, I was going to bring up the fact that you never know when a viewer is going to join in the stream. So making sure that any point in the game, people can very quickly be like, what's happening? What are you winning? Are you losing? What's going on? It's very important to convey that information, because naturally the streamer is going to know if they've been playing it the whole time, but a lot of their viewers won't always know. So, some strategies might be, try to display the overall event score as much as possible when you can. Try to, as we said, display rounds to figure out how far they are in a game, display what game you're on if it's a multi-game event. that's all helpful information that, it is helpful for the playing experience, but also it's even more helpful for the viewing experience.
And I'm going to say even one of the easiest, most important things, which actually isn't that easy, is just giving a timer between games.
Mm-hmm.
When you're a
Yeah.
viewer and you see I tuned to my streamer and it says their next game starts soon, but what does soon mean? When should I be looking? Should I go watch someone else now? Should I do something else now? Instead, if you have that timer to know when the next game is going to start, perfect. They know when it's coming. They know when to be prepared, especially for the players as well. The players want to know how long they're going to need to essentially stall for slash, just be entertaining
Or
with
go
like
to the
nothing,
bathroom.
or go to the bathroom, or just not have a lot to riff off of as they're sitting in the lobby or the hub waiting for the next game. But instead of a timer, then they're more prepared to know how long they're doing this. But then to go on next point is the theming of the event. Now I'm going to use MCC here again. It's going to be our best example for most of these things because that is how the current space is. And MCC's theming is very like this carnival, festival, party style event. I mean, the hub was built from their summer festival map that I think was on Bedrock. I have to
Yeah, it was
check
a
where that one
Bedrock
was.
map.
It was a Bedrock map.
Well,
It
maybe
was
it was. It's hard to tell. It was an old one, so.
It's an old one, but it was heavily influenced by that. A lot of the colors and a lot of the theming. And when when the hub used to be like on the land before it went up into the sky, it was all very much, you could tell where the inspiration came from. And that's kind of true like across each game, and even within like the decision dome. There's like you see the same concrete used like in the same bright colors. You see the same wood colors for each team. You have all these like similar textures and things that are used between games that make it so when you watch, you go, that's MCC. That's that game because it feels different from another game, but all of these feel like MCC. And that just comes down to that level of polish that is very hard to attain.
Yeah, we kind of mentioned earlier, like MCC is good at branding themselves. Just like having like what is the MCC brand, and like making it so when you see an MCC clip, it's MCC. The other big thing is like the hotbar and inventory are all like custom. Like it's that kind of gaudy red and yellow colors that really make it stand out, and
Yeah.
it fits that crown with red background color. It really makes it stand out. It's like, yes, this is MCC.
And it also just fits that vibrant color that the whole event has. That if you play like vanilla Minecraft by yourself or play just an event with no texture pack, you'll notice how different the color just feels. Just like how exciting the color can add, the sound design, the music, all the things can be added to the theming to then make the event overall feel better. But we're going to talk more about theming when we talk about sound design, music, art, when we have people who are a little more expert in that than us to be able to offer their contributions. But the next relevant point to talk about is just how much work it takes to make an event. And this cannot be understated. We're going to say it a lot. We're going to talk about testing, how much time that takes. But time coding, time making the builds, time making the music, time designing all of this, it cannot be understated how much time that it will take. And really, it starts at the beginning. It starts with your game design, your event concepting, because the clearer you make that at the onset, the easier it is to make decisions going forward. But as you know, Gilan, Minecraft is a perfect game.
It is a perfect game. It's such a well designed game. Making stuff in it is super easy. It never causes problems. You never have to spend weeks and upon weeks trying to fix glowing in one of your games.
That is, of course, a lie, and Gilan will give us a quick explanation for why developing for Minecraft is so hard.
Okay, so I'll try to make this quick. Minecraft isn't really made. It's funny. It's one of the best games to modify in the world and mold your own. It's a sandbox. You can mold it to your own liking. But it sometimes seems like the developers don't want you to do that. Um, there's a lot of difficulty with, working with lots of different plugins and lots of different server software and getting everything working. There's a lot of ways and mechanics in Minecraft that just don't fit together, and whenever you try to change something slightly, it breaks everything. And I mean, that's just code and game design in general, but Minecraft sometimes makes that worse. And the reason that a lot of Minecraft events have these points of failure where all of a sudden like, oh, we have to sit here and wait for things, is because there's just this fine line where Minecraft's, the server crashes because one thing went wrong. And that's just a thing that, as we said, testing and spending a lot of time working on is the only solution.
Is the only solution, but then sometimes you can get beat by something you didn't even know was a problem.
Yeah.
For example, I don't think it was said publicly, but Block Wars 1? Was it Block Wars 1 that crashed during battle? The
Yeah, I
server
think that was the first
crashed
one.
because the plugin used to cause knockback from snowballs in multiplayer tried to update and it could not find the update path was no longer available. And so
Mhm.
since it couldn't find that, it told the server this doesn't exist, I don't know what to do, and crashed the server. Which remind you, we are in battle playing a different game, but the code is just best set up that way. Rather, like, not that they're all games are running simultaneously or anything, but it was still checking for some of that. And there's been work now to make sure that something like that doesn't happen, code's being run in a different way. But that's a bug that you would never notice because you're just pulling in a plugin that you're like, this will cause snowball knockback, there should be no issues with it, until you realize there's one line of code in here that will crash the event at a random time.
Yeah, and in the future we'll probably talk about this more, but you also need to make sure that you have a plan for what happens when one of your games crashes, because you just have to expect the worst. You have to expect in the middle of every single game the server is going to crash, and no matter what time of the game, you need to decide early, what am I going to do? Are we going to keep player points? Are we going to give them back? Are we going to start where we were? Are we going to restart the whole game? You have to figure that out early. I would even say write it down somewhere that you can point to as like, here's a guide for what we do in all these situations.
Mm-hmm.
Because one of the main things that causes like controversy with Minecraft events is that when these things happen, points get reverted, all these things, and content creators don't know exactly what's going on, and they get angry. Viewers get angry.
Yes.
So trying to avoid that is you
Paramount.
just can't create perfect code, but you can create perfect reactions to code breaking.
There's even the extra issue that if the event is for money, and so therefore, something breaking disadvantages one team or advantages another, is now a big issue as there's like $50,000 on the line. We
Yeah.
saw this with some of the events back in like 2021, 2022. I'm not going to name names for them because they're long ago and it's no fault of their own. Essentially, money was tossed to a team that was probably put on a very tight timeline to do this and was not given the appropriate amount of, leeway to test and make sure it was all going to work. And I think that's the thing we're going to harp on a lot. Like, we'll point out issues in some of these events. We'll mainly stick to like the bigger ones that should not, in some ways, should know better, but are also, we're going to acknowledge that like they're usually going to get like fighting crunch time, trying to do this in a hurry, trying to do this with limited resources sometimes. And that doesn't mean they're free of blame, but that it is an acknowledgement of like that's what happens. It's similar to in animation or VFX that there's lots of times these great, brilliant people doing incredible stuff, but they're just put in situations where they can't do their best work. And so it's not meant to be mean to them, but just recognize like here's why some of these issues happen. I mean, for example, yesterday Bisec Hosting had a big game that also I think was raising money for charity, and they had their server crash during the eruption game mode. Or I don't know if it technically crashed, but it lagged out enough to like kick dozens of players from the server.
Mhm.
Um, but that's a thing where like we don't know exactly the reason that caused it, but it's probably something that could be solved with more testing. We also don't know that for sure.
Mhm. Yeah, of course. We don't, as outside viewers, we don't exactly know what's going on. We have very limited information. And so when we try to say things, we're going to keep in mind that, they might have limited time. They might not know
Mm-hmm.
it. It might be something totally out of their control. I mean, one of the funny things that, if you remember a test we did recently, for some reason in Minecraft version 1.19.3, um, sometimes on Spigot and Paper servers, if you send a chat message, it will kick everybody who sees the chat message,
Yep.
which is probably has something to do with the like, what is it, the chat report system and like
Yep.
the verifying chat messages. But it's like it's a problem I looked up, and people are like, yeah, we don't exactly know what exactly is causing it, and the only solution is just stop chatting. So I had to turn off chat for the entire server
It was a
during
funny
testing.
quiet test.
Yeah, we did a quiet test.
But the point being that we greatly respect everybody who's putting on these events, whether it be anything from MCC, EVNT, even to the smallest events of Crown Quest, T for Top, or others that are currently going on, because we know how much work it takes. And so we respect the work you put in and the drive and motivation it takes to get this far to even have a finished event ready to go. We talked plenty about, coding being a time commitment then for developing a game, because obviously any custom game has code with it, but there's also the builds. And we touched on game design, that good game design is also good build design, like they go together. But it's also the point that like what constitutes a good build in Minecraft nowadays is ridiculous. The standards are so much higher than they used to be.
Yeah, it's also this problem where people are always arguing over what also counts as a good build.
Yes.
Because if you go on Twitter, and anyone should just go on Twitter and look at like people who post their builds from like build teams and stuff, like the fully rendered builds, because
Yes.
it looks like 3D models. Like it zooms so far out because it's like people basically sculpting with Minecraft blocks, and it's beautiful and like amazing and doesn't even feel like Minecraft anymore because it has all this great lighting. And it's we're just at this point where it's like, how can the average person ever hope to achieve something like that?
And I think there's a lot to be learned. There's plenty of tutorials about learning building the same way there is coding. But I think it's also understanding that if you give your event a good theme, it kind of shapes the building you're going to do for it. If all your building is related around space or themed around space, you don't have to get good at medieval building at all. You don't have to worry about the genres that could be out there. You can like narrow in and focus. And the reason I bring up how much building has changed is you could look at like Grian's like early, I don't know, 2015 builds and compare them to like his modern builds. And it's not even that like Grian has just gotten better, is that the techniques that the best people use have evolved. Like the idea of using gradients now in the build where, different shades of gray to white to go up from the base of the build to the top wasn't a thing in 2015 Minecraft, wasn't a thing back in the day. But now it's common practice to do that. And so it's that these techniques are evolving, and that if you want an event to have builds that stand out, you, in my opinion, need a specific theme that you go towards, unless you have some of these expert builders that are out there, because it is very hard to compete.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good example. So Dynamite Donut, who did building for Blockworks, correct? Built a lot of
He
Blockworks stuff.
does the main part of Block Wars
Does
building,
the main
yes.
part of Blockworks building. I remember at one point uh, asking you for a build server and like listed all the plugins needed.
Mm-hmm.
And like some of them, like I remember I went around and played with some of them. Some of the plugins are crazy. Like there's one that I forgot what it's called, but it basically allows you to like select a bunch of points and it makes like a smooth line or smooth like mesh where it's like you can make cloth by selecting 4 points and telling it to like make it's like I think it's loft or something is the name of it, and it's like crazy of like what it can do and like how gigantic of builds you can make, and that's tech that did not exist years ago in Minecraft. You couldn't do that. You'd have to build that by hand. And a lot of times, if you built it by hand, it would take way too long. It might not look as good.
Mm-hmm.
And like that's just changed what building is now.
It's changed the idea of building from being like a place block at a time to place entire terrains with mountain ranges in like 30 minutes. And then it's like, all right, now I'm going to go put the build in. And they're like, oh, I can use this to generate the build easier. I can use these, you know, templates. Like, for example, in Sky Zone and Block Wars, those are both map versions, the first one and now the construction version. The islands are randomly generated. So Donut made smaller builds that would then get placed and generated on each of the smaller islands around. And so that's a technique of I don't think you could do back in the old version of Minecraft. And it's the idea of then saving time, because he's not going in and making a new map every time or changing the map or making sure it all plays, similarly around it. Instead, he's making like 20 buildings, and then we're having them be distributed throughout the islands in a way that, matches the island size and such.
Yeah, that's a great example of everything like coming together. Like it
Mm-hmm.
doesn't matter if you have one person doing code, one person doing art, one person building. Like you need to be interacting and figuring out, hey, here's what we need to do. Like communication is important. You can't just hire a programmer, hire an artist, hire a builder, tell them what to do, and have them never talk to each other. Like that doesn't
Yes,
work.
it
It's
all goes
it
together.
all works together. It's just like, I mean, if you watch any videos or read any books about game design, like for any just normal game design, anybody making a Unity game or an Unreal game, it doesn't matter. It's all about it's all about everything has to fit together. The art, the in this case the level design, which is building,
Mhm.
it all has to fit together, and you need code to attach that. There's all these parts that have to mesh, or else it just doesn't
Yeah.
not work.
It's extremely difficult and it takes a lot of coordination to pull those all together. And then even when you get to the later stages, when you get to testing, testing is not quick and easy. So at least I know for our events that we test for, we have what are called focus tests versus full tests. And sometimes we also have just like internal tests in a sense. But the idea being that focus tests, like we're going to play one game and check that everything works as it's supposed to. Full tests, you run through the whole event, you check everything works. And the internal test can kind of be like, we're looking at just this one tiny thing. Let's make sure it works. And good testing means you have to do all three of those continually throughout the process as you make changes, as you switch up and take in feedback about the games. You have to keep testing them.
Yeah, I mean, anyone who's ever written code before will know that you change one thing somewhere and somehow things break somewhere else. And that's like the main problem with testing is like, yeah, I'm just making a small change right here and it sends this cascading effect that breaks everything else. And that's why, if you're planning, okay, we're going to have our official event on this day, after the last test, you do not change anything. You just leave it the way it
You gotta
is because
freeze
you
the
do not want
development.
things to break. Everything is frozen. You have it all set up exactly where to go. So there's one button you press to start it, and like you don't worry about it because even if you think, oh, this probably won't change anything, it probably will.
Yeah. And there's different elements to testing. Not every test can test every part of the event every time. For example, if we're, just post Block Wars 4 or we're post Block Wars and this Origin's coming up next week. So imagine we are, starting work on Block Wars 4 and the next Origins. And for that, we might change up a game or change up a certain part of, Sky Zone or something. So we want to go play Sky Zone more. We want to test it more. But if we were bringing in a brand new game, we would want testers not only like play the game as intended, but also play it to try to break it as much as possible. Like literally find anything or any way out of the map, find any exploit they could get so that we could patch them early and make sure that those don't happen on event day. And having those different kinds of tests means just more time.
Yeah, and I can say as a developer that part of me hates those testers who just break everything, but also part of me loves those testers because that's they did it and not the person in the event who did it, and that's the important part because you never can predict exactly what will happen in an event. So if you can have tons of different testers, as many as you can, trying all these different things, you can just try to cover as much problems that could arise as possible.
Yes, for sure. And the other important thing to recognize is that sometimes testers will complain about something that's like an intentional part of your game. Like imagine somebody who tests Ace Race says, I don't like the green jump pads. They don't feel the same as the red jump pads, so I don't like them. You could go, okay, we hear your feedback, but like that's a core part of the game we want to keep. If you're getting, half your testers all saying we don't like these jump pads, they don't work appropriately, then it's time to, all right, we need to change that because this is not working. So it's in terms, you're going to get a ton of feedback throughout testing, and that's great. The feedback is often very helpful to make it all work well, but it's then incorporating the important feedback and also finding the feedback that could either be incorporated later down the line or shouldn't be incorporated just because it's a non-issue for whatever it is.
Yeah, I mean, it's very important to understand that when someone gives feedback, you don't have to you have to listen to it. I think that's the important part. You should listen to
Yes.
feedback. You should not ignore feedback, but you don't have to implement it. You have to take that feedback and think about it. And if you're like, okay, yes, this seems like an actual problem, how can we fix it? Um, and I think in the future we'll probably talk more about like fixing problems and how there's multiple ways to fix problems. I think remember in a recent test, a tester had an idea for like, hey, here's this problem that we are planning on fixing, and they brought up an idea for how to fix it, and we also had a different idea of how to fix it. And like you can kind of figure out which of those ideas is going to work the best.
Mm-hmm.
But both of them are trying to fix a problem, but it's like the question of which of these fix the problem the best, and which of these doesn't cause more problems down the line.
Yeah. And we'll definitely talk about testing. The whole episode will be dedicated to testing for sure, because it is difficult in the sense of usually having to manage a large group of people and coordinate them into helping give feedback on your event, but also then difficult to understand, what is good feedback, what is feedback you should implement, how should get testers give feedback, and like how much should you be able to prioritize fixing everything. Because the other thing you're going to learn then through this, I hope, is that perfection is impossible for your event. That's just how it goes. I mean, there's too many variables, there's too many things that are open to interpretation of what is the best thing that you could argue this way is better than this way. And so whether it's the code, the art branding, the builds, even the testing situation, none of those things will be perfect, but it's important to get them all to be able to work and function well together. Because unfortunately, as we've seen in the past couple of years, a lot of events fail at just one of these things, whether they don't have enough time, whether the code or builds aren't great, whether they didn't test enough, or events fail at multiple of these, and then the whole event just kind of fails. And as I like to say, every event that fails is worse for the overall Minecraft community, particularly the Minecraft event community. Because if you're a fan, pretend you're a viewer of like Purpled. Purpled plays in a lot of events. You go to Purpled's stream, you watch MCC, you have a great time. You're like, this is how events should work. They should all play really well. They should all function. They should be fun, exciting. You then go watch Purple play in Block Wars, and you have like a similar experience. Like, it's different, but I enjoyed it. You then go watch Purple play an unnamed event. I'm not going to call anyone out for this. And the server crashes 20 minutes in, and then they can't restart it. And then the server crashes again 5 minutes in after they finally get restarted. And then they play back the game, and then another crash happens, and you're sitting around waiting, and you're like, oh, I don't really want to watch these random events now if this is the expectation of what I'm going to see. So every event that fails makes all the other events be pulled down in a sense. So we're hoping to provide, some insight about how to make these and do them well, because we want everyone to succeed with their events, even if your event's going to be the next MCC or it's going to blow Block Wars out of the water too. No matter how great it ends up doing, we're excited for you and we're excited that it could, end up being great.
I think one important thing to add is, if you're, let's say you're like, okay, you're listing out a lot of things. I just want to make a fun little event. I don't need it to be perfect and all these things. I just want to do it with a group of friends. That's perfectly fine. And I love seeing events that are like small and it's like just a group of friends. That's where Block Wars started. Like, Block Wars was just a bunch of people who basically knew each other doing it. And, Block Wars in the beginning had a lot of problems, but it didn't matter because it was just a small group of people having fun. And if that's how you view it, if you just I just want to make something that my friends can enjoy, that's great. But I think there's just this idea where it's like expecting that, like, okay, well, I just make this event for all my friends, but also I want all the big content creators, but they're like, there's this realism of, an event that's for friends versus an event that is, going to be played by people with thousands watching, hundreds watching to thousands.
There's the
watching.
idea of just knowing what the scope is of your project when you're going for it and who your audience is that you want to play in it. If you want to make an event for your friends and you're never going to change that and your same friends are going to play it for like a year, that's great. That's awesome. I'm great that I think it's awesome that you have a group of friends to play that with for that long. But if you say, I want to start with a group of friends, I want to slowly build up to be having, content creators in the same way Block Wars did, that is a path that is a lot more difficult, let me tell you, and comes with a lot of nuance in navigating all of those things. But it's a path that I guess we do have experience with, and we should be somewhat helpful to aid you in that. But I think nonetheless, whatever event scope you're going for, we'll have something to add about how to make that event be successful. I think that's a good way to wrap up episode 1. The future episodes, we're going to have more in-depth discussions on specific parts of it. We'll do one for game design. We'll do one for just the player experience. We'll do one just for theming. And we'll try to make sure to bring in interviews with people who are experts in these. Whether if we're talking about game design, get a game designer here. If we're talking about player experience, get somebody who worked on Block Wars, or get somebody who's worked on MCC. For theming, get a builder or an art, the resource pack artist, somebody that there can also add their touch and their expertise. As well, we'll probably give some updates and analysis of recent events that happened, because those events are kind of the lens through which we're learning. It's easy to draw comparisons to MCC to talk about what's working the best, but it's also easy to then draw comparisons to Block Wars or EVNT events or other ones going on to say, this is also what a good event can look like. And even some of the smaller events, as I named earlier, Crown Quest, T for Top, have good things going for them. I think there's stuff to be learned from those. Any other ideas that you have, just drop them in the comments for us, and we'd be more than welcome to. I'll be more looking forward to looking at them and seeing, what topics you'd be interested in us covering, because there's a lot to cover. Because making an event is like making a game, and making a game is not an easy process
it's
at all.
not.
But I think we will end it off there. I'm Joey. That's Gilan. We'll get a name for this podcast hopefully by next week.
One day.
And I'll catch you next time.